In the spring of 1987, a wildlife biologist in the mountains north of Los Angeles fired a net gun at the last wild California condor on the planet, a male known as AC-9. When the net closed and the bird was secured, the wild population of the largest flying land bird in North America dropped to exactly 0. Every single California condor left alive, 27 birds in total, now existed only behind chain-link fences in 2 zoo breeding facilities. What conservationists did with those 27 birds over the following decades became one of the most aggressive rescues in American wildlife history. And what happened after they went back into the sky reveals a recovery that one peer-reviewed study has bluntly called deceptive. Every claim in this video is drawn from official population reports published by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's California Condor Recovery Program, field data from the Ventana Wildlife Society, and peer-reviewed research published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. This is not the simplified version of the condor story. This is what the actual 4 decades of data show. To understand why biologists made the drastic decision to empty the sky of condors entirely, you first have to understand how far the species had already fallen. California condors once ranged across most of North America, from British Columbia down through Mexico and east across the continent, scavenging on the carcasses of Ice Age megafauna. By the 20th century, hunting poisoning campaigns aimed at predators and the pesticide DDT, which thinned condor eggshells until they cracked under the parent's own weight, had squeezed the species down to a single wild population clinging to the mountains of Southern California. By 1982, only 22 California condors remained alive anywhere on Earth. Wildlife agencies spent years locked in bitter disagreement over what to do next. Some argued that condors belonged in the wild no matter the risk. Others argued that leaving them there was a slow-motion extinction. By 1987, the second camp won the argument, and the last wild bird was trapped and brought into captivity. The captive breeding effort that followed was methodical and, at the time, unprecedented in scale for a bird this large. Biologists at the San Diego Wild Animal Park and the Los Angeles Zoo used a technique called double clutching, removing a condor's first egg of the season to trigger the pair into laying a second, then hand-raising chicks using condor hand puppets so the birds would never imprint on humans. Every single California condor alive today is a descendant of those original 27 captive birds. Releases back into the wild began in 1992, first in the mountains of Southern California, later expanding to the cliffs of Arizona and Utah near the Grand Canyon in 1996, to Baja California, Mexico in 2002, and in 2022 to Redwood National Park in Northern California, where the Yurok tribe led a reintroduction into ancestral condor territory the species hadn't occupied in over a century. The first chick hatched entirely in the wild since the recovery program began arrived in 2004, 17 years after the species had briefly gone extinct in nature. The population numbers, on paper, tell a genuine success story. From 22 birds in 1982, the total California condor population, wild and captive combined, reached 607 by the end of 2025, spread across California, Arizona, Utah, Baja California, and now the Pacific Northwest population in Yurok territory. But here is the part that a simple population graph doesn't show. In 2019, California became the first state to ban lead ammunition for all hunting statewide, specifically because of the threat it posed to condors, which are scavengers that feed on carcasses and gut piles left behind by hunters. It was a genuine, hard-won legislative victory for the recovery program, and it has not solved the problem. Since 1992, there have been 161 confirmed condor deaths from lead poisoning in the wild population, accounting for roughly half of all deaths where the cause could be determined. Even after the ban, lead fragments from decades of ammunition remain scattered across the landscape, and enforcement gaps mean some lead ammunition still reaches the field. A 2012 study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences modeled what would happen if wildlife agencies simply stopped intervening. No more captive-bred birds released. No more trapping wild condors for blood tests. No more emergency chelation treatment to pull lead out of a poisoned bird system. Their conclusion was blunt enough that the paper's own title called the recovery deceptive. Without constant human management, the population would not sustain itself. It would decline toward extinction again, which raises a genuinely uncomfortable question for a story that looks, from the outside, like an unqualified win. If a species can only survive because humans keep pulling individual birds back from lead poisoning one at a time indefinitely, Is that recovery? Or is it life support with really good publicity? What both sides of that argument agree on is the scale of ongoing effort involved. Field biologists still trap free-flying condors on a rotating basis just to draw blood and test lead levels, treating birds with dangerously high readings before they die. The recovery program's own long-standing goal is 3 genuinely self-sustaining wild populations of at least 150 birds each, a target that, decades after the first releases, still hasn't been reached in any single region without ongoing supplementation from the captive breeding program. Nearly 4 decades after AC-9 became the last wild condor on Earth, the species is unambiguously no longer extinct, and that alone is a real earned achievement. But it is not yet the finished comeback story it sometimes gets sold as. The condor's future is still being negotiated: 1 blood test, 1 chelation treatment, and 1 non-lead bullet at a time, which might be the more honest way to think about wildlife recovery in general. Bringing a species back from 22 individuals is extraordinary. Making sure the world it comes back into can actually hold it without help is a completely different, much slower fight, and for the California condor, that fight is still going on right now.